All right. We are filming an episode of History Unraveled here this morning. Mr. Thurman Storing, fellow historian, recent graduate, Arkansas Tech University. He's come on the show and talked about his master's thesis and is collaborated in many ways with the podcast. So always a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you very much. So I'm very excited to be able to do this episode. For a long time, I've had this fascination with 1968. And we kind of, I think, and just having a podcast or when you were over, we started kind of talking about it. And it's awesome to be able to collaborate on this. But we're doing a series of episodes over 1968. I've wanted to do this for like over a year personally. And have had a fascination for many years. So we're going to be talking about two really kind of a heads and tails sort of approach, but two big incidents that kick off the year, January of 68. And obviously they create a ripple that goes out into the rest of the year. But the Pueblo Incident or Crisis it's termed, and the Tet Offensive.
Right.
So those are our topics. And Pueblo is kind of what kicks things off, right? So, we've had some remarks on Pueblo previously. Like, what did you know about Pueblo? When did you find out about it, etc.?
See, what's interesting, I think, about the Pueblo incident is that even though in, say, 1968 or even in the subsequent years after that, it is an important event. However, I don't recall actually reading about the Pueblo incident until I was, I'd say, into college at that point. It had kind of been buried up. And I think part of the reason of that is just due to the scope of what would come with the Tet Offensive. It, in a way, gets buried, even though it is an important international incident. The Pueblo Incident or Crisis is that, in a way, Pueblo, even though it drags throughout the year 1968, in a way, it gets buried by what happens in Tet. And part of the reason for that may be because, well, you have more press coverage that was already embedded in the Vietnam conflict in the actual country at that time, and the focus was more on Vietnam. But the implications of the Pueblo incident could have had far larger ramifications on sort of the global scale if let's say if attitudes had been somewhat different, if Johnson or the other military people had decided maybe to escalate the tensions a bit more, it could have been a very, very different outcome to this. And it may have expanded, war in East Asia. We may have returned back to the Korean, to the peninsula there.
When I feel like that was... based off my research, is that the initial knee-jerk reaction was sort of a retaliatory response, but due to many things we're going to talk about throughout these episodes, that became quickly not a possibility. For many reasons, but then the United States gets detained with all of these. It's just if any domino effect analogy we could apply to this would be each one of these events and months that we're talking about sort of start escalating, and then the United States really can't deal with this issue. They don't have sort of the diplomatic negotiating power due to Tet.
Right. Yeah. In a way, the United States had already had its plate full pretty much at that point. And as Tet would demonstrate, is that I feel almost previous to this point that the United States feels that justification for their military actions is that their military actions somewhat justify the need for war. That they're like, we're winning the war, we're funneling all these resources and things into the war, and it's providing what they believe are results, which are these statistics like body counts and things like that, which later become important in the whole Vietnam thing. But that things like Tet or even Pueblo show that the military solution doesn't work, that the you can continue to funnel as many resources and men and guns and bombs and things into this, but it's not going to provide a winnable solution at this point. That it's the point where right, diplomacy is almost necessary at that. It's you can't use the strong arm of the military to justify your actions because it's just not working.
Yes.
Right.
I don't recall retaining anything about the Pueblo incident until I started is a larger interest, having known about the common events of 68.
Right.
Because like you mentioned, Pueblo is just not, it's been buried in many senses. But I didn't hear about it for the most part until I started digging, into the month by month approach, or just trying to flesh out the whole year of events. What are some key things that happen? And really, this is the first thing that always comes up.
Right.
But it doesn't have a lot done about it. So I talked with Dr. Woods, and I was like, hey, what do you know about this? And Dr. Jeff Woods, he's been on the podcast. Author, historian, and he turned me on to this other historian that he actually went to school with. The guy works at Ohio State University now as a professor, Dr. Mitchell Lerner.
Okay.
Have you had a chance to look into him any at all?
I've heard the name, but I haven't looked at any of this.
He's probably the foremost historian on the topic,
right.
Ironically. So I just happened to ask Woods, I'm like, hey, do you have a recommendation? So anything I've found out there is one other book out there. I think it's called An Act of War.
Okay.
But Lerner's book, The Pueblo Incident, The Spy Ship and the Failure of American Foreign Policy, 2002. That's where I got a lot of my info from. And he has several podcast articles,
right.
and there are several articles online that I've read, right? There's it is becoming more of a well-developed topic, and I feel like we're kind of taking part in that process right now. Honestly, it's just kind of I've been assimilating as much data as I can on it.
Yeah,
I never would have thought going into this I would have amassed as much information, like a dozen pages of notes and stuff like that. So,
well, I'm just maybe it shouldn't be surprising because unfortunately Pueblo is sort of relegated to this footnote, right, sort of in history, but looking into it, right, the implications of the incident are pretty enormous on sort of the right. It could have went either way. The direction that this could have been completely different. But one thing that I got to thinking about too is that not only does this apply to 68, but it also has even ramifications to today. As far as our relationship with North Korea, and it's interesting going through some articles and reading some things is that you see the Pueblo thing sort of resurface, right? Because they still have the Pueblo itself. They still have the actual ship there. Yes. And it's part of a museum that's devoted to these great North Korean military exploits, right? And
at one point in time, the person leading the tourist attraction was someone who claimed, I'm sure he probably was, to have been on the ship that captured the Pueblo, right?
Right.
So I have, if we want to watch towards the end of the show, if we want to watch. There is a YouTube video of a clip of the tourist attraction in North Korea. So, but yes, it is. Imagine if Donald Trump is able to somehow get them to release that, because that is something that's not being called for, at the higher levels of naval leadership or national leadership. But these crewmen that are still alive, and just the Navy in general, I'm sure they would love to have their USS Pueblo back.
So if I understand correctly, right, the USS Pueblo is the second oldest ship still in the United States fleet, because it has never been decommissioned, right? Correct. Because if it were decommissioned, then it would be surrendered, which we don't I guess, want to own up to that, really, right? So it's still technically, I guess, in active service.
And it was launched April 16th, 1944.
Right, yeah. It was originally a light cargo ship, correct? Right.
Yes, just a passenger and freight ship, FB 344.
Right.
What it was commissioned as originally.
And then the Department of Defense in the 60s is like, hey, we need these smaller vessels in order to hold these sort of spying missions, right? And so it's like, hey, the Pueblo is a perfect example of a ship we could use, because it's not.
Yes, and they, like you mentioned, they apparently did this with several ships, and the Pueblo was going into these waters under these sort of assumptions and precedents that I'll talk about a little more in detail, that like, well, we've done this before, surely nothing bad will happen.
Right.
Which didn't seem to be the case this time. So just a little bit about, like, so for listeners that don't really know kind of the ins and outs, the sort of basics of the incident, is 83 Americans are operating a spy ship off the coast of North Korea in international waters. Now, they likely did meander back and forth a tad.
Right. It's interesting that that's still a contentious point, right? It's like no one will. I mean, you have North Korea claim, hey, they intruded into our space, but then you have the Navy saying, oh no, we didn't. We were just hanging out, kind of in the international waters or whatever.
What was your assessment based off your research on that?
Based off my research, I think it's most likely that they did stray into North Korean waters.
I think they were. Right. I think this is based on my research. One redeeming point is when the North Koreans took the United States, like when they did capture the USS Pueblo, when they attacked, fired upon everything, the Pueblo was in international waters at that point.
Right, yeah.
Based off what I'm reading. Now, there's also like a little footnote on that. But the North Koreans had doctored our charts, and so it's like it's kind of a he said, she said type of a thing.
Right, exactly.
But that is kind of the basis of what happened. One American is killed during the capture. There's 6 total officers aboard, 83 crewmen. 2 are Korean translators, but they can't. It's been 9. They did a 9-month course years earlier. They aren't fluent in Korean, so they can't really translate the intelligence that is coming in.
Yeah, I found that it was interesting too, based because I remember running across it that there was somewhat of a blame put on this sort of inexperienced crew for exactly what happened. Yeah,
they didn't have a background in naval intelligence.
Right.
So then you had the ship's captain, Pete Bucher. Bucher. I've heard a couple pronunciations on his name, but he didn't get along with some of his the next in command of the ship. I know that was something that went on. There was just poor communication. And I feel like were not adequately prepared based on what they were going to experience. But yet they were told, like when they were first attacked, they're like, hey, don't worry. They told us something like this might happen. Yeah. So even at that point that they're, getting fired upon, it's like, or not getting fired upon, but getting told to surrender their ship and stuff. They're like, yeah, whatever. We've been here before. Don't listen to them.
Right. Well, didn't they still have radio contact at that point with the Navy?
They did. They were trying to get. Okay, so that was one fault of because I think that the Pueblo is running the dual intelligence. They were doing a couple of tasks for the NSA, but they were running naval intelligence in the region. Against like Soviet positions and stuff in the region, but it was in that Sea of Japan, the Eastern Sea and stuff. So for whatever reason, all of the authorities that would be the bases in the region that could have got there, the fastest I read that anyone could have got there to help was 90 minutes when they got fired upon. And it's mostly because they didn't know who was in the USS Pueblo was and why they were there. And there was all this scrambling to gather intel on that. And just wasn't able to do anything before they're getting towed into North Korea.
Right. Okay.
But so USS Pueblo, we mentioned, was originally commissioned
Right.
This event is a 11-month long, so we're going to do this sort of blow by blow throughout the year. But January 23rd, 68 is when it's captured.
Right, that's when it's captured. And I think what's interesting about this too, right, is that the day before that, you had what was called the Blue House Raid on South Korea.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
In which there was supposed to have been an assassination attempt on the South Korean president by these North Korean commandos, and it had failed, and only I think one person was captured and one person got away and the rest were killed. But that tensions would have been high anyway at that point. And you have the Pueblo who's just sailing out there on the water, and they're probably unaware of everything that's going on you know, at this point. So no wonder North Korea is a bit more agitated.
Yes, well, and Kim may have been trying to leverage the sort of waning influence of the North and the rising influence of the South, and just trying to balance some things and get some propaganda in place because of the failure of the assassination attempt.
So it's just like kind of, in a way, North Korea was going fishing, right, for some type of PR.
There's a lot of interpretations on that. Now, they did get a lot of PR out of this. And
that's true.
Sort of the interesting thing, and why I don't realize or don't see why the United States couldn't do this sooner, is this thing I'll talk about called the 3 A's. When the United States finally does admit, they're like, oh, there's no way that we'll just admit, and then they get the propaganda reel, and it'll just get disseminated to their people, and we'll then say that, you know, hey, we're only doing this so they're releasing prisoners. And so they kind of give the Koreans what they want in the end, but then they denounce it immediately, but that part is never given to the Koreans. So this becomes this sort of full circle propaganda event that the Koreans are able to use, but it does have some backlashes I'll talk about, which spurns this Hell Week and some things that happen to the crewmen, which are very unfortunate.
Well, since we're talking about like the incident itself and how it happens on January 23rd, 1968, what is it with sort of, say, the area, these East Asian areas of seas and these sort of shady naval sort of incidents that are occurring? Because this has connections with Gulf of Tonkin, right, in 64, right, which was a sort of, in a way, an equally contentious sort of event. It's like, who fired first, who did, who did this, and of course LBJ used Gulf of Tonkin to escalate the war in Vietnam. However, with the Pueblo incident, we see that kind of we don't see that approach, right? It's somewhat different. I mean, they weigh the options, whether they're going to, hey, are we going to have a display of military power? Are we going to, implore? Do we need to go and assess the situation if we're going to invade or whatever? But I just think it's interesting how you have Gulf of Tonkin that helps or aids in creating the Vietnam situation, and then you have the Pueblo incident, which in a way has some similar sort of characteristics, but it has a different ending to it, right?
Well, that's a great point too, to kind of call into question some of the other things that happen, like, hey, did the United States, were they back and forth in North Korean waters a lot?
Right.
That was primarily what they were doing, or, and the North Koreans didn't doctor any charts because, hey, look over here what the United States has a precedent of being involved with.
Right.
Can you think of any other incidents other than Tonkin?
No, not off the top of my head. I would say that you do raise a good point, is that Pueblo, in a way, brings up a lot of questions, right? It's like, what are we doing out there?
It does.
Right. And have we been out there before? Have we been doing this for a while?
Well, there was some precedent, and I feel like those assumptions from the United States are that, like, we've been, Soviets spy on us over here. We spy on them. Mm-hmm. Everything's cool, because we're spying on the Soviets and they're an Eastern communist bought nation. Let's say we gather some intel on these 4 Korean harbors while we're doing it. It's all the same.
Yeah.
But that's one of the biggest misperceptions, I feel like, that leads to this 11-month-long debacle, is that there's these false assumptions made that we should associate all communist nations as being in this conspiratorial plot against democracy together.
Right, and the fact that it's with the Pueblo incident, it's like the United States is treating North Korea pretty much as like the stepbrother to like the Soviet Union, right, at this point. Because, I mean, if you want to flash back to the Korean War, it's the United States doesn't recognize the sovereignty of North Korea, right? Oh, we don't recognize this nation. So it's interesting. Instead of like, it's like we're hopping over them and going right to say, yeah, the Soviets or China or whatever. But it's not like North Korea's idea, which is why initially, right, it's like intelligence believes that, oh, this incident, they captured the Pueblo, this must be a Soviet plot, right? It's not North Korea sort of doing their own thing, making their own decisions. It has to be, right, this larger conspiratorial communist plot, right, which has been prevalent in American society or in the consciousness of American society since the 50s.
Yes.
I mean, if you want to jump back to the Red Scare, and that all these nations are part of the same sort of evil entity that is threatening American society, American way of life, freedom, liberty, these ideas. And yeah, I think you raise a very good point with that.
Yeah, that is just these misperceptions. Mm-hmm. They're fascinating.
The Red Menace. That's what, right.
Indeed. Well, and so that brings a broader point up, is that I've found evidence that the Soviets did not condone this.
Right. Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
If anything, they were probably you could say frustrated with the Koreans for not being more willing to negotiate with the United States. Now, I don't. Have you found anything or to have any thoughts on? Because I did see some historians making this point: is that if Quezon is a sideshow to Tet, that is the Pueblo incident a sideshow to Tet? Internationally speaking, in a larger sense of is it a misperception to say that North Korea, sort of aiding and abetting, knowing that the North Vietnam, the Vietnamese government was going to carry out Tet, and in the United States, I mean, Westmoreland was predicting this is going to happen. I think this is going to happen here and there. This is where they're going to try and take Quezon out. But that is a point that's come up a couple of times in my research, that maybe at least LBJ suspected in this conspiratorial manner that the Pueblo incident was a sideshow, like trying to divert attention, and then they just get engulfed dealing with Tet and can't deal with this effectively. So it's just creates a lot of foreign policy issues and ultimately failures, as Lerner's pointed out in the title of his book, is that this isn't something that we look positively back on, Mm-hmm. So that is what are your thoughts on that, though?
My thoughts, if you look at the larger picture, I don't feel that the Pueblo should necessarily be relegated as this sort of sideshow to Tet. I think it's its own. I think it holds its own importance. I think and part of that importance is that along with Tet is that Pueblo helps in a way. I mean, it's an international embarrassment. It raises all kinds of questions about what are we doing? Why are we doing this? It raises a lot of questions about secrecy and purpose in East Asia. What are we doing out here? But I think also that it helps because it is published. It is a PR sort of thing. You see a lot of press about it. I mean, you don't hear about it much today, but you see a lot of press about it in '68. But that it sort of helps turn the tide of not only what are we doing in East Asia, but it also paints the and I know this term is used in conspiratorial work a lot, but the military-industrial complex, meaning not like the shadow government stuff, not that, but like as far as just the apparatus of the United States military, and it starts to turn people more against the military than necessarily it does. I mean, it turns people against the war in Vietnam, but it, in a way, I think Pueblo and Tet function as sort of as a turning point where people are not only doubting the war in Vietnam, but they're doubting the institutions of the military. They're doubting because of the way that they handle the situation in Tet, the way they handle the situation with Pueblo, the way they handle when the hostages are released, when they're brought back and they're put on or they're the court martial thing.
Mm-hmm.
And
which is sad. When I came across that, I was like, and I think we will in a later episode discuss My Lai, but the outcome of that and Callie essentially being pardoned, getting off, but that makes sense. Let's reprimand with My Lai, like that made sense,
right? Yeah,
but with this, it's like,
well, because it came across as only as the Navy protecting themselves. That's what it was, right? They're protecting they're looking for a scapegoat, mainly because the Pueblo had these sensitive encryption devices and things on it, right? So it's like, well, somebody has to pay for this, but right, there's not like a huge humanitarian loss like there was with say like certain massacres and stuff that happened in Vietnam.
My Lai.
Right. Yeah, it just looks bureaucratic and it looks out of touch, right?
Yeah, indeed. So the official name of the operation being ran, and again, this is one of many operations, Operation Click Beetle. Mm-hmm. So this is going on in the region, right? And when Pueblo is recommissioned, it's stripped down. It is not given like any essential equipment it needs to destroy documents quickly. Self-defense systems. The steering mechanism fails constantly. There was one stat here that kind of blew my mind. When it 3 months before departure, it goes out for a test and runs a series of drill. It reveals 480 issues, and 70 to 80 of them had to be fixed immediately before it could be seaworthy. Most of them were not dealt with. Mm-hmm. The steering engine had all these issues, failed constantly. The communication system had issues. The radar system had issues. So. But that's these things, like, they didn't really want to tell when this was being commissioned. They didn't want to tell anybody what it was going to be used for.
Right.
So when they were asking for certain things to be put on the ship, because there wasn't up and down communication, they were denied. And they didn't want to ask for certain things. They didn't want to give certain things away. But there was previous spying that had been going on in the region, intelligence collecting info about the Soviet fleet that was stationed, or the thought is that they were looking for Korean submarine technology.
Right.
But the Pueblo was 16 miles off of the Korean coast when it was captured. And as I mentioned in my research, it was in international waters when it was captured. But there... in the Sea of Japan is where all this takes place. You mentioned just right before the Pueblo is captured, you have this failed assassination.
Yeah, the Blue House raid.
Yes. There was a series of incidents that went down. So first of all, when they start running the course of their mission, they leave port in January. The weather's bad. They're not getting much intel, and what they are getting, they're not able to translate quickly. But they do end up with like a few thousand pages of documents, which fall ultimately mostly into Korean hands. But the 21st, they run into this torpedo boat right?
Right. Yeah. Then they encounter some fishing vessels at some point too. Right?
Yes, but they're unable to. They try and send some communication about the torpedo boat to Washington. Can't get it through.
Right.
Failure in technology. The 22nd, they're briefly surrounded by 2 North Korean ships. They make a couple of laps around the Pueblo. And they send messages back to North Korea saying, hey, we have sighted an American ship, even though the Pueblo has no markings indicating it's an American ship.
Right.
That's what the official reports. And then the 23rd is when all this goes down. Essentially what happens, they are announced, hey, surrender, we're going to fire on you. And they are Booker is trying to buy time, right? So he fakes mechanical failure. They ultimately get fired upon as he's trying to destroy documents. They don't have they have a tiny shredder and a tiny incinerator.
Right. Well, that's why I asked. I had read, hey, yeah, they had radio contact, because I almost feel like they expected somebody to come out there and sort of save them, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And that's with the failed breakdown. It's like I remember coming across that a couple of times and being like, I wonder if he just kind of was like, this ship's got some problems.
Yeah.
That's my reality. I'm sure they'll be like, the ship's breaking down again. But it's like, that's ultimately when they fail or playing like they're broke down. That's when the North Koreans fire upon that. Ultimately kills one of the crewmen. Mm-hmm. And wounds several more. Yeah. And then the North Koreans board, blindfold, tow them back in, and that starts this 11-month-long prisoner of war negotiation between the United States and North Korea.
Right.
So after that, the crewmen, they're POWs.
Right. And they're subjected to all different types of torture.
Regular torture.
Beaten. Yeah.
So for the first couple of months, that's where they break them, right?
Yeah.
They get them, they beat them with these wooden blocks. Here's a terrible one. You ever seen the movie Die Hard, the very first one? It's great Christmas film. But they make them crawl across the floor on broken glass.
Yeah.
That's wild. But they will starve them. They expose them to cold temperatures. That's something I read about even during Hell Week.
Right. I thought it was interesting psychological stuff that they did too.
What did you come across on that?
Well, I came across especially since with the captain. How is it that you pronounce
Booker?
Boocher
is what I was going to call
Boocher.
Yeah.
But like that they staged like mock firing squads.
Oh yeah.
And that, hey, we're going to shoot you, or we're going to shoot your men, or that, and a way to kind of break them. And I think that's pretty heavy.
That is. Oh man. That is psychological, because just the fear. I remember one time my dad raised me like hunting and stuff, and I would he was teaching me how to shoot guns, and like I never wanted to shoot a gun that had any kick to it. Right. So when I started going deer hunting, I had to obviously start shooting a gun that had a kick to it. But one time he was trying to get me, to shoot it, but he didn't put a shell in the chamber. And I finally squeezed the trigger, and I just knew the gun was going to go off, but it didn't.
Yeah.
And that suspense and all, I was behind the trigger. I can't imagine what you're saying, the psychological pressure of sitting there watching one of your guys or one of your officers. We're going to fire on him, but then it just clicks.
Right.
Or you're there about to get fired on, and you hear the click, not the pa. That's
right.
Man. But they were subjected to torture. They're able to break them and get what they wanted, which are them signing and recording apologies and confessions.
Right, which is fairly standard sort of communist kind of procedure in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, you see it in Vietnam too.
Correct.
Which is interesting. And I don't know if in a way that feeds into this sort of, well, they're all part of the same sort of group or political entity or whatever, the Red Menace, right?
Yeah.
But that it's like it's so demoralizing, right? To have to, I mean, not only be captured, but pretty much renounce your country and your ideals, right? It is more psychological warfare.
It is, and these men were going to be, in many ways, when they come back after this event, physically and, like you said, psychologically, mentally handicapped for a while. Right. So it's there are definitely some long-term psychological effects with many of these veterans. I would like to there are some out there. I haven't watched a ton of like any interviews I've seen with the former crewmen were done in like a news interview documentary format. I would like to see some more of like the individual crewmen, interviews of just like one-on-one with them that aren't in just like a sort of scripted format. I've seen. Yeah. But there are some of those out there, and Lerner has interviewed all of the ones I believe that are living, knows them. So, so ultimately, LBJ super upset about this. Yeah. And all of the military leadership in the LBJ administration and the American people initially want revenge, but the reality is that there's probably nothing they can do to save them. Vietnam is definitely taking the attention of the United States going into 68. Right. The U.S. initially reaches out to the Soviets, China, the United Nations, the International Red Cross, all of these international groups like, hey, please put pressure on Korea so we can get these crewmen back, right? But essentially, that doesn't work, right? We know the Koreans had sent some intel and things the day after they captured the Pueblo to the Soviets, so that fueled the United States conspiratorial mindset that the Soviets were backing this. But the Soviets for 10, 11 months, or not the Soviets, rather the North Koreans for 10, 11 months, negotiate with the Americans at the DMZ and say they want the 3 A's, which are apologize, admit, and assure. Yes. Right. So apologize for having violated coming into North Korean waters. Admit that they had spied and run a spy operation. All true. Assure that to the North Koreans that they would not do that again. So they want the 3 A's. Well, the United States, they don't want to do that initially. There's really no threats that are working for the North Koreans, so this just becomes a long and drawn out thing because the North Koreans will not settle for anything short of the 3 A's. Right. So, and we see through communication in my research that the communist bloc states are not happy about this. Right. So, which leads me to believe that this is that mindset of, hey, that the Pueblo's linked to Vietnam and Tet, or that Pueblo's linked to a Soviet-backed plot. That leads me to believe that all of that is just in the mind of the Johnson administration. So Tet begins in late January, detains the United States. Basically, attention to the negotiations are still ongoing, but they're just stalemated for a good amount of time, like February through April. Really nothing really happens beyond that moving forward until towards the end of the year.
Yeah, well, I think also part of this is just sort of exasperated because or prolonged. Sort of like what I mentioned earlier, is that the United States refuses to recognize North Korea, as its own nation. It's interesting, hey, we're gonna go and we're gonna implore the Soviets or the United Nations, the Red Cross, but it's like we're kind of leapfrogging over the nation we should really be talking to, right? Mm-hmm. About it's sort of like if you're mad at somebody and you just, hey, tell this person that I said this, and then you go and send them over there, right? Yeah, it's kind of like that. And
I use the telephone game analogy a lot in history classes. Yeah. Like when I'm talking about sources and writing and where you get your information from and how many times it's been passed down, it's like it's something worth considering.
But even like 20 years later, like the Korean War was still a sort of sore wound, I guess, in a way, because it wasn't a victory. It was just a ceasefire at this point. And you have these, right, you still have all this pressure between South and North Korea.
Well, and I think that is why, like, if you had to ask the question, why would North Korea do that? Mm-hmm. Let's say that that there's, they did meander into Korean waters, but they were in international waters and they're caught. Like,
right. Yeah.
Why North Korea would do that? Well, the ceasefire, the soreness over the Vietnam War, there are a whole lot of tensions still in the region, and
right.
North Korea basically wanting to not be so much of a stepbrother, maybe
right.
like a cousin.
It's like them sort of like, hey, look at me, I'm over here. Right? Yeah, it's kind of
certainly
like that. Right.
Certainly, I totally trying to assert themselves as more of a communist power, right? A notable communist power, which is kind of, I think, been a narrative that we could agree on even to this day. It's like,
absolutely, right. It's just right. Oh, we're testing nuclear weapons, that sort of, and in a way, right. It's more like they're just trying to say we're here.
Yes. So there's a breakthrough in the treaty negotiations in '68. There's a State Department official, James Leonard, at the suggestion of his wife, by the way. He goes home, he's like, I guess this is never going to be resolved. Probably just end up going with, whoever the next president is who will have to deal with this. And she's like, well, how about you just sign the document, admit the 3 A's, and then publicly state that you or denounce that you're doing it just to get the crewmen back, which is ultimately what they do, right? So, which is, it's fascinating to me that that didn't occur sooner, right? That if that idea had been fielded, let's say in February, do you think it would have went down that way?
I don't know.
I think that the Koreans needed to get their propaganda.
Yeah.
Which I want to make some comments about that in a moment.
Right.
But so the Pueblo ends up becoming a great propaganda opportunity, and long term, even with it being a tourist attraction. The crewmen are ultimately released and blamed for denouncing and other things. But I would say ultimately what happens is the Navy buries the incident, just like you said, and it's very much an effort to sweep it under the rug.
Yeah, and to pass blame on to the crew for this whole situation having happened. And one of the reasons that I feel, and that turns people sort of against the Navy or the military industrial complex, right, is when they bring them back and they're like, hey, we're going to court-martial these people because they didn't put up a fight. They just let the ship go. And these captured crewmen were very resilient people. Right.
They were.
I mean, like the way that they found ways to sort of stand up, right, against their North Korean captors is really fascinating.
That is one of the most fascinating parts of this whole story, and that is what Lerner and then others I've heard, I think the crewmen kind of termed it this coming back, was Hell Week.
Right.
So they're always getting the crewmen to watch these propaganda films. And in one of the propaganda films, they realize there's like the Koreans are playing at this soccer event against. It's in London, and the English fans, the middle finger gesture at the Koreans, and the Koreans smile and acknowledge it and like bow, and then the Americans realize that they don't know what the middle finger gesture means.
They don't know what the bird is. Yeah.
So that becomes this. They start doing that, and they're doing this in photos. They're doing this on
for
film,
propaganda, photo ops. Right,
and they tell the Koreans it's the Hawaiian good luck sign.
Right, yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
like the Hawaiian good luck sign. So they're going to film, like on one point in time, they're going to film something, and one of the Koreans like like flips in the birds, like, have a great press conference.
Yeah.
And like, because they think it's like, hey, good luck out there with spreading this propaganda.
The Hawaiian good luck sign. Yeah.
What happens on that is that one of the Americans, they start sending, first they make them, they have them make propaganda to disseminate to the North Korean people. Then they start disseminating propaganda to family members, Washington officials, news outlets. Some of the crewmen send letters to Dr. Reverend Hugh Hefner to a mentally disabled hospital in Washington, D.C. called St. Elizabeth. But there's all of this them flipping the bird and stuff in these photos, and one of the uncles of the crewmen, I believe it was an uncle, it's a family member, takes this to a news outlet, and it gets to multiple news outlets. Right. The Koreans figure that out, and that's what then they up the torture even more so in this event that they call now Hell Week. Right. But they were using the middle finger gesture and video on and two, there's one video where they're Morse code blinking that they're being tortured. Right. And so in the North Koreans, they just couldn't pick up on the intricacies of language and cultural aspects
cultural
like
barriers,
this.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's
but when they did, they were not happy about it. So
right.
But Hell Week, that is a very unfortunate part, and that occurs towards the end of the year, right? So they've already been captive for several months, and they have to go through this other incident of torture. The prisoners are released, but it's still a blemish.
December 23rd, shortly before Christmas. Yeah, they're led across the bridge of no return.
Yep, taken back to the United States. And now the ship is still a tourist attraction.
Yeah, it's still there. And
so bullet holes circled and highlighted. Some of the original equipment still on board on the ship. So this is a great, I think, opening gun on rising Cold War tensions. Yeah, but also rising tensions in the United States, which I think is kind of one of the thesis points of our whole series of talks here, is that this is creating a much larger ripple effect domestically in the United States, that there are all of these events that are dealt with ineffectively, poorly, or seen as failures, or incidents that happen, and it just really wrecks the United States. I mean, I was listening to Bobby Kennedy talk in an interview yesterday, and it was during the riots, and he was like, we need to ask ourselves, or no, it was after Martin Luther King was assassinated. He said, we need to ask ourselves what kind of nation we are and what kind of nation we want to be. Right. And that is, I know we'll go more into Kennedy in some later episodes, but so what are your kind of concluding thoughts on the Pueblo as a Cold War failure?
As a Cold War failure,
or would you call it a Cold War failure?
Well, I think I think it is internationally, right. It's an embarrassment. I mean, it's bad. The Navy does bury it, but right. I think the impact of it at home is probably what's most important here. And that's not to belittle the international situation, which was bad, right? But that Pueblo, and along with later Tet, helped to turn people against the war and against intervention in Southeast Asia. Like, it's like I mentioned earlier, it raises these important questions, like, why are we doing this? Why are we here? Why are we spying?
We thought this was okay.
Is it? Yeah, right. And it's what kind of a nation are we at this point? And I think that is a question that gets raised. But I think it's important that Pueblo not be relegated to like a footnote in history. It is important. It's internationally important, but domestically, yes, it's important too. And I think not just because it establishes that the United States is spying on these other, that there's this veil of secrecy that exists, because in a way it is, and this ties in with Tet, is that it is furthering what became known as the credibility gap. Right.
For sure.
Where you have United States intelligence telling the public one thing, and then you have these flare-ups happening that demonstrate that the situation is not under control, that the East Asia situation is pretty much that you're being lied to, is sort of what it is that Americans are in the dark about what's going on halfway across the world, even though it is a primary focus for the Johnson administration, for the United States military, and that at the point in 1968, you had nearly 500,000 American soldiers in Vietnam, that people's kids are being sent across the world to die in a place that we don't understand, we know little about, and that there's no control over this situation. And that's why I feel that Pueblo is important, and of course Tet's important. And I also think Pueblo is important because I think, to me, the real kicker with Pueblo is when we get the hostages back, and the way that the Navy treats them, I think is just deplorable, right?
Agreed.
Is that, yeah, we're going to court-martial these people. We're going to publicly embarrass these people again, who've been who've been captured for a year, subjected to heinous torture, but who, as you demonstrated by things like the Hawaiian good luck sign, and they were like, they hadn't turned, right? They hadn't turned against America.
And there's great evidence for that.
Right. Is that they were fighting their own war, and we're taking them back and treating them as war criminals, right? But they hadn't betrayed the United States but the Navy tried to make them look like they didn't do their job, right? And I just think that helped turn people against it, because I mean, these are all like younger guys, right? They look like they could live next door to you, or they're your son, or, you know, like that. And it's like, well, we're treating them like they're traitors, right? But they're not. And so I think that was, in the press, I think really, really important, and sort of adds to this divide that is happening between the public and the military industrial complex.
Yes, agreed. That's a great point. So Tet, right? So like right as this is kicking off,
right,
within a week, the United States is going to have to deal with another major incident, which, this Pueblo incident being swept under the rug, you take it out and you put it with Tet. Mm-hmm. That really worsens conditions. I mean, This is really a double blow for United States PR.
Yeah, right. It's adding fuel to the fire. I mean, there's already a fire burning, but it's just you're just continually just adding. Yeah, you're adding more incidents to it, and it's you can't ignore it anymore. Is what it is. It's everything's not under control. It's definitely out of control.
What are some points about Tet that you think are notable in comparison, or just as an event? Like, I mean, obviously it's election year. We're not off to a great start.
Right, yeah.
We have this international event. Then we have tensions heightening in Vietnam. I feel like this is a remark I heard somebody made previously going into 68. There was a lot of uncertainty and a lot of tension, and a lot of people basically just not saying what they thought.
Right.
Which kind of, I feel like, with the Cronkite's conclusion of, hey, this is a stalemate. It's going to be a stalemate. I think that a lot of people in 67 were starting to think that, but we're not voicing that up the chain of command. That's something I kept running across, because like I went through a fair amount of resources on 67, just kind of trying to get like my mind around what the perceptions were going into this year that we're talking about, 1968, and how it kicks off with these two incidents.
Right. Well, I think what's interesting, especially about the start of 1968, is that if you look historically, or I would say retroactively, people will now say, oh, we were against the Vietnam War, or that the conflict in Southeast Asia, we didn't want to have anything to do with that. But I think what's interesting is looking statistically at analysis from the time, right, is that the Vietnam War wasn't wildly unpopular at that point in time. I mean, amongst certain groups of people, right, is that there were still people who are like, okay, yeah, we still trust the military and what they're doing out there. And especially, but right, the tide is turning at this point. People are beginning to turn against the Vietnam War. Shortly before Tet, you had a march on the Pentagon. Have you read about this in 67?
No, I don't. Not if I have, I'd not retained it. So
okay, there was a march on the Pentagon where you had 75,000 people make a march in Washington on the Capitol, and I believe I want to say Robert McNamara was like on top of, I forgot where, but like apparently like overseeing like everything going on down below. But it was like pretty much where you had confrontations between armed guards and sort of the more anti-war people, but not like violent, but like where it's boiling. It's coming to a point. It's boiling over. But that was in that was in 67, right? But at this point, you've got sort of this growing anti-war movement that's happening, and a lot of this is starting with the younger generation, right, with the college kids. And I think what's interesting, especially about the early and, well, say just all Vietnam protest thing, is that it was sort of a collaborative effort between both faculty and students, and that these protests were originally called teach-ins.
What university was it got completely shut down? I think it was in 68. I think it was after Tet.
I don't recall.
Sorry, yeah, that was something. These are happening across nationwide. These college protests,
right? These college protests, right? But these teach-ins or whatever, and the date on the march on the Pentagon was October 21st, 1967. So we're a few months before Pueblo and Tet and all that. But that the teach-ins, that this domestic opposition, especially at these campuses. And due to the fact that they were a collaboration between students and faculty, in a way gave legitimacy to these protests, because you had these professors and teachers involved in it, right? It wasn't just a bunch of like young people. It was also like the older generation too, who were involved in it, who were saying, hey, this Vietnam thing is not right. It's, we don't need to be here, that sort of thing. But, right, that's sort of the lead in to Pueblo and to Tet, and that there was this growing anti-war opposition. But at that time, the Vietnam War was not exactly wildly unpopular, and that anti-war policies didn't quite exist at that point, that the anti-war movement wasn't affecting the media. It wasn't a way, but it wasn't affecting policy. It wasn't affecting government policy at this point. But after Tet is where you see that happen.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
That is a very great point. And what is it about Tet overall that causes that shift?
See, I think that's a really good question. Is that, and like, yeah, this I would say that the shift happens with Tet, not only because it's opposed to what sort of Westmoreland and the other generals had been saying about Vietnam, which in a way widens that credibility gap. But I also think due to the media presence that was already in Vietnam, that was able to broadcast these images back to the United States, I feel that these images of war and all that had influence on people. I think it's easier to see a picture and to say, okay, well, that's horrible, than to read about it. If you have a visual element, it can be dispersed to more people. More people can, in a way, identify with it or process it in a way that's, I think, different than reading. But I would say that media presence had a significant impact on it, because that's when the media really turns on Vietnam, right? Because you have Walter Cronkite, right, who is like, yeah, it's going to end in a stalemate. There's no way that the United States is going to pull out a win here based on what's happening at Tet. Which, but Tet was a it shouldn't have been a surprise, but it was.
Yeah, yes. I mean, even though Westmoreland was saying that he felt like something was going to happen, he really wasn't calling it for what it was. And two, the Cronkite incident, but one of the standouts for me at Tet is that image of the execution of the Viet Cong.
Yeah.
That is, and I would say in the media, and then also, like, let's say you and I as students later seeing that, like, it's like that incident where the person pours the hydrochloric acid in the swimming pool. Yeah, it's like when people see these iconic types of images, like the Buddhist monk's self-immolation, right? Those are things that you're never gonna be able to get that image out of your head, and that image has implications about asking these same sort of questions. And I would say that these things that we're bringing up are just like almost like fuel, right? Or logs that are being thrown on this fire, which is growing in size.
Yeah, I think, right, along with the imagery, I think like another sort of important thing about Tet is that it really influences policy after this point. Politicians begin to turn against the war too. I think that's important, and it becomes sort of this. It can't be ignored no longer, especially with the presidential election in '68. It becomes a main issue after Tet. I think that's important.
It does. I mean, so how much? Go ahead.
But getting back to the imagery thing, and we talk about the impact of it or whatnot. I think another thing that differentiates Tet and makes it impactful on sort of the American consciousness is that Tet is taking place in cities. It's in domesticated sort of areas, right, where you have buildings and things like that. It's no longer the war is no longer in the jungle. It's no longer in the rice paddies. It's right on the street. And I think that has some impact on how the perception is that things are falling apart, right?
That's a great point too. Yeah. It is. It brings it home so much more. I was on that. We were texting last night, and I told you to watch that Ken Burns documentary. But in the cities, documentary. It really is. It's probably my favorite one that he's done. I have my students watch the Thomas Jefferson one for U.S. History 1, which we're starting after spring break, by the way. Which will be all online delivery.
Yeah, that's true.
Pretty much the rest of the semester. But it's an excellent documentary. But they were, there was this misperception by the North Vietnamese government that the people in the South would rise up against the Americans and join the North. North's nationalist call to arms. And Ho Chi Minh was being broadcast for a moment, I believe, over speakers in Saigon, and they cut it and started playing Beatles songs. Jimi Hendrix and stuff like that. So definitely that was something that stuck out to me. I thought was
but it showed that the Vietnam situation was indeed not under control. I mean, the Viet Cong were able to pretty much embed 60,000 of their own people all throughout these provincial areas, these towns, these.
Well, they'd amassed, I think, 30,000 troops around Khe Sanh.
Yeah, so it's like, so it definitely.
LBJ had a 2-scale model of Khe Sanh in his in the Oval Office, and they updated it like a play-by-play.
Yeah,
like he was basically leading operations in a way from the White House, because they would update it almost live as things are going on in Vietnam. But that is, he refused at all cost to lose Khe Sanh as a part of that. But I mean, so like militarily, Tet was a win for the United States.
Yeah, yes, it was. Right,
and it really broke the back of the Viet Cong.
Yeah,
and of the North Vietnamese Army after that. And I feel like that being a fact, and then talking to some Vietnam vets myself, of like Cronkite saying what he did after, that's kind of some sour grapes for a lot of people.
Right.
Like this one guy I was talking to, I work with him, his dad is a Vietnam vet, and his dad was super upset about Cronkite saying that stuff. And his dad, he said, was around like at the base of Hamburger Hill. But you know, that was something that was interesting to me, is hearing like a vet's take on it that was there.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. But yeah, the VC lost like nearly, if not more than half, right, of their forces in this. And they were pretty much beaten back at that point, right, driven out. But somehow, I mean, it becomes this American Pyrrhic victory. Right?
Yeah, it probably in a way does boost some morale.
Right.
But yet there's this other effect that we're talking about.
Right, which is you have the media turning on, and that reflects back home too. And I think, this is talking about sort of where this is taking place, right, which we're in the villages and towns and streets of South Vietnam, right, and fighting the North Vietnamese. And that this incident left nearly 200,000 civilians without homes. I mean, like the civilian cost of it was enormous.
That's especially so in Hue.
Right.
Them ultimately getting the city back and driving out the NVA, but at the cost of the homes,
it's like what's
how many
left?
citizens were displaced is truly amazing.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. It's what's left. And it sort of allows this growing instability, chaos to kind of take over at this point, when you have so many people sort of displaced and you're fighting over these areas that are just decimated right afterward. So it's like, what are we doing? What are we fighting for? What
it does, it raises a lot of questions.
Right.
And I think that is, if you look at it from all sides, how the military views it, how politicians view it, how the American public's viewing it, how the North Vietnamese are viewing it, how the South Vietnamese, everybody kind of has a different spin on it.
Everybody has their own interpretation of it in a way. And you still have the Army who, in a way, their tried and true method of things like, oh, we killed this many, in comparison, it's like we killed 3 North Vietnamese to every, or 4 Vietnamese to every 1 American or something like that. So it's like, well, they can't have that many people left. So they're still using the statistical analysis in order to, I'm trying to think of how to put it here, to justify, right, why we're doing what we're doing. Hey, we're causing all these casualties. They're going to run out of people. We're doing the pacification program where we're going through the villages and trying to rout out, any North Vietnamese or sympathizers.
That's what Woods' book is going to be about. Right. Pacification.
Yeah. But it's not working. I mean, it's statistics may show. I mean, this is like, this was with Robert McNamara, right, who is using mainly these statistics as a basis for saying, hey, okay, we're winning the Vietnam War, but it just doesn't reflect correctly because it doesn't deal necessarily with the hearts and the minds of the people involved, right? Like it's like this idea that, I guess, this underestimation that the people of South Vietnam were going to rise up with the North Vietnamese, and do the same thing, but they didn't. But then again, it's not like, I mean, did they really help out with the army, with the South Vietnamese army when they were invading? It's a battle. It's a strange sort of moral battle, or that's what it becomes, or it should be more focused on, instead of numbers and how much money that's put into it. And I think that really starts to turn people's perception toward the war. And when you see the cost, right? You see the, I was doing some research into it, and apparently since the 1950s, it's the idea that Tet demonstrated that the military's sort of reassurance and spending on the war, just the constant resources being funneled to it, were futile. It was like impossible after this point, especially when after Tet, the North Vietnamese, I mean, they're not done. I mean, Tet demonstrates that they're still there, they're still a force, but that since the 1950s, more than $40 billion had been funneled into aircraft and missile programs. But however, there was only a 40% success rate on these programs. I mean, that's a ton of money that you can't account for. So not only is it affecting people, say, on a moral level, okay, well, like, you know, I had a son go off to Vietnam, and he was either wounded or he died, or, you know, or I knew somebody who went to Vietnam and they came back and they had PTSD, or, you know, but it's also hitting Americans in their pocketbooks too. But it's showing that no matter what we put in Vietnam, it's not going to stop this North Vietnamese force. It's not going to stop their drive. It's not going to stop it's not going to change their minds, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, there's no winning the hearts and minds.
Right. There's no winning the hearts and minds of the North Vietnamese, of the Viet Cong. It can't be done.
Well, and I think you could argue too is that this highlights that in terms of the Vietnam War, there's no more winning the hearts and minds of the Americans.
Yeah, right. That too, right. It's the double-edged sort of sword here, whereby you're getting both edges at this point. You're losing the war, not just it's like, I guess in a way you could view it as you win the battle, but you lose the war, right?
Here's something super disturbing I came across. Post-Tet, we're still not at even half of the death toll of United States soldiers.
Yeah, right.
So this starts this process of the end of the war, the final phase, but you still have, you know, this issue going on with, like, we're still in Vietnam till 75.
Right, yeah.
There's still tons of casualties left to be taken, so.
Right.
All right. Well, so any concluding thoughts on Tet here?
Well, I mean, Tet is kind of one of those historic events that is, in a way, with not just 1968, but Vietnam War, with 60s and all that, it's kind of been done to death. You know, I mean, I'm not saying that there's not new things you can pull out of it, but I feel like it's an event that's talked about quite a lot. And I think that one thing that is really important about things like Tet and even Pueblo is that it does raise this question of, is America fighting a morally righteous battle against the heathen communists, right? Because later, right, we get into these incidents and atrocities that are being committed by American servicemen, and it's like, well, who's good, who's bad? Why are we spying, lying, and killing our way across Southeast Asia and amongst the people that we really don't understand? And I think that's one takeaway of this. But who really is the ugly one here, right? Especially if you get into sort of, because I mean, we did mention, right, that sort of the background on Vietnam, right, that we had been there since like the 50s.
55.
Yeah, we had been there since the 50s. We supported the French, but that the idea of sort of Vietnam had been around in the American sort of pop culture lexicon for that time, because you had the book The Ugly American, right, which is about sort of all these exploits or anecdotes about America and Southeast Asia and what we're doing there. But it sold like over 2 million copies. I mean, it was a popular book, but the Vietnam sort of question had been around for a while. But it's the question, like, who really is like I mean, it was bad then, and now it's even worse at this point. And one of the implications that arises out of this, not just from a moral standpoint, is that how politically the effect is, and that's where you get Johnson, who LBJ changes his tactics at this point. He scales back the bombings.
He does, yeah.
On Vietnam, and that was actually at the behest of his defense secretary, who's a guy named Clifford Clark, who told LBJ that at this point that they really needed to stop sending troops, that they needed to make South Vietnam more sort of accountable for defending themselves.
I think there was 130,000 troops requests or something. He only sent 13,500.
Yeah, right.
I could be inflating that first number, but they only sent 13,500 additional troops.
Right, and to stop the aerial bombings. And that's where you get this important sort of media social moment where LBJ goes on TV on March 31st, 1968 to announce about the Vietnam situation, that he's scaling back the bombings on Vietnam, and then he does the bombshell at the end where he says he's not seeking re-election. And that just opens the floodgates for not only the Vietnam question to be one of the absolute central ideas in the 68 presidential election. Like, hey, what are we doing here? Why are we here? You get the anti-war stuff in. But it just opens it up to chaos, and you get all these personalities and people involved in the 68 presidential election then. So in a way, it's kind of like Tet becomes, even though it's a victory militarily, it's
a butterfly effect.
Yeah.
It ripples.
Right. It ripples through. It affects culture. It affects people's perception of the Vietnam War. It affects the media, which I think is interesting too, because the media turns pretty much against the Vietnam War at that point, right? Is that this is bad, we shouldn't be doing this. And that a lot of the reporters who were there in Tet or were embedded in Vietnam later sort of, and this is what I was talking about with turning on the military industrial complex, more so than just the war in Vietnam, but the apparatus, the administration itself, is that some of these reporters also contributed directly to the release of the Pentagon Papers in 1971.
Yeah.
They worked for the New York Times, and that they were there and witnessing all this stuff that was going on in Vietnam, and that in a way that sort of turned them against the military. And
yeah. Well, it was Ellsberg that was receiving the transmissions about Tonkin at the Pentagon, was it not?
I believe so.
Yeah. Fascinating. So we're going to do some future episodes on this topic of 1968 Unraveled, and just kind of digging into these incidents throughout the year. So we'll have some future episodes on that. We'll be putting together some additional content and doing some research and getting together and continue to collaborate. So,
right.
Any other concluding thoughts, Thurman?
Not at the moment. I don't think I really have anything left here. But okay, one of the interesting things I think is that I ran across a source that argued that Tet only retroactively sort of became this game-changing thing, especially in the minds of American people. And that people just didn't see the imagery or hear the news of Tet and were like automatically against the war, even though it may have, or that there's no statistical real proof that happened. Mm-hmm. I thought that was fascinating. I was like, okay, because most of the time people retroactively look back and say, hey, Tet's one of the moments where Vietnam War, hey, that's not good, right? And a lot of it is, I think, because of that powerful imagery, like the execution stuff. And
yeah, but I guess maybe we had to have some time to sort through it.
Right. Yeah, but that it directly affected the policies, and that sort of trickles down to how people perceive things. It's sort of more like top down instead of the down up sort of approach.
Yeah, I could definitely see that.
Right. Which I just thought that was kind of fascinating, because like I've always heard that Tet was like one of the, the absolute crucial turning points where it was like a light bulb went off. And people were like, "Oh, we shouldn't be doing this Vietnam thing," you know. And
yeah, and if anything, I kind of mentioned this earlier, it's almost just like starts another phase of the war.
Right.
You could call it the final phase, or you could really, in terms of like serious escalation, you could just call it the midpoint.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
know?
Right.
I mean, so like 63 through Tet, I would say would be like your hot points, or, you know, even 60, I guess you could say, because I mean, 55 too. One thing that this came up on and I'd heard Johnson quote this before, but with Khe-Sanh, but with DNB and Phu previously,
right, yeah.
Johnson, this isn't gonna be a damn Dien Bien Phu incident again. Like, but just the perceptions of Johnson on this whole thing from the time that he gets it with Kennedy's assassination to Tet, and us being that escalating period. And let's say that we do start some de-escalation after Tet, it's still this very long and drawn out process in which around 30,000 additional more American soldiers are going to die.
Right. And I think it's also interesting to point out too, especially mentioning LBJ, is that LBJ won the election in 64 against Barry Goldwater based on this idea of, hey, peace, you know, or the Great Society, or we're going to end poverty. And by the time we get to 68, we see that that's not the case, and that Johnson's platform of peace is escalation, that he's continually just upping the ante in Vietnam until we reach the breaking point of Tet. And that I just think that that's an interesting point, is that maybe by 68, maybe Johnson realized that it wasn't achievable, right? And that's part of the reason why he backed out of the election, that, hey, we had these sort of progressive, grandiose ideas for how our society was going to be, how the East Asia situation was going to turn out, and that none of that has come to fruition at this point, and we really don't know what to do. That it's sort of a chaos moment, a moment where it's a bit distressing.
It does. It makes it a definite sort of nexus,
and it functions in a way as a breaking point, right? Where it's like you look back, and even though as historians we look back and we point to specific instances where, okay, things have been going bad for a while, right? I mean, like the Vietnam situation had never really been under control, and it was never really a winnable situation. Of course, we can say that as armchair historians or whatever, looking back, right? Hindsight is always 20/20. But that 68, especially even early in these months, functions as a point where people are waking up and they're realizing that there's no going back, that whatever was before is gone, and that we are in sort of a new reality is what this is. The dawning of a new reality. And I think that's why people get sort of hung up on 68, is just because there's so many events that just hammer this point home, that America has changed, the world has changed, people have changed, and that there's no going back from this point.
Yes. Nice. Well, man, super. I'm looking forward to exploring more topics with you on this in the future. Many thanks for your continued collaboration, coming on the show. We have many things to talk about all the time. So we'll be back with some future episodes. We'll wrap this one up, and want to thank everybody for listening, and tune back in for future content.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
Signing off.